The developing countries are the worst victims of climate change that owes its emergence primarily due to the anti-environment activities of the developed countries. In such a situation, it is the moral duty of the developed countries to not only control the rising impacts of climate change, but also help its victims in mitigating and adapting to the new climate realities. In this effect, the big powers promised a fund worth $100 billion to the developing countries in 2009 at the UN's annual summit on climate change at Copenhagen. Soon after that, the UN Secretary General set up a high-level advisory group on climate change financing, which is called AGF. AGF released a report in November 2010, just before the start of 2010 UN Summit on Climate Change. The report's contents were challenged by all the developing countries. Pakistan's ranking is on number 16 in the list of most vulnerable countries due to climate change. It faces a serious dearth of experts on climate change. AGF report should have been critically analyzed. Luckily, the issue was picked up by a national NGO, Lead Pakistan, that claims to be the largest network of sustainable development leaders around the world. One of the leaders in the network, Malik Amin Aslam, critically analyzed the AGF report that Lead has published in the form of a discussion paper. The big powers are the polluters. Their environment unfriendly activities are responsible for changing the climate patterns. As a result, the rest of the world is facing the consequences. Providing finances to the victims of climate change is the responsibility of the developed countries. But what they are actually doing in this effect is just a lip service. They have failed to provide the promised funds in 2010. Their pledge of $100 billion is peanuts if compared against the price of natural calamities due to climate change. Just one flood in Pakistan in 2010 caused a damage worth $10 billion. Moreover, the intentions of the big powers are malicious. They are misleading the world by playing tricks. For example, the provision of funds has been linked to certain conditions that immune the big powers from paying, and the burden has been shifted to the developing countries who are the victims. This is the thesis of Mr. Aslam's paper. He is a former State Minister of Environment and holds a master's from the Oxford University and specializes in climate change issues. The AGF was tasked to find out ways and means to ensure the provision of a long-term climate financing, that is $100 billion per year by 2020. Mr. Aslam's first criticism is AGF report did not have any internationally recognized standing. It was neither requisitioned by the UNFCCC or by the UN General Assembly. He points out that the big powers should have provided the finances on the guiding principle, that is, the polluter must pay. Moreover, the financing must have been driven by the need for catalyzing low carbon development and financing of adoption in vulnerable countries. But this principle has been ignored and linked to another doctrine, which is commit now, figure out, or evade later. The announcement of finances was made to win the sympathies of the victim nations. Even the fast-track financing was not provided to the victim countries, and the report was silent on this point. The developed countries failed to provide the $7.5 billion that they should have put on the table last year. Mr. Aslam has disputed the financial figures of the report, saying that it is driven by guesstimates based upon arbitrary methodologies and disputed calculations. The developed countries are clever. Instead of allocating funds, they have linked them to private funds, directly and indirectly secured through carbon markets. This is a clear proof that they are running away from their voluntary commitments. They have cunningly converted their pledge to loans to further indebt the victims of climate change. This responsibility cannot be shifted to the private sector. that is driven purely by the profit. The report has aggravated the process of climate negotiation rather than helping the cause, and the victim countries like Pakistan have been left on their own. Mohammad Shehzad, Politics and Development Magazine.